Welcome everyone to our third installment of the Growing Vibrant LA Communities webinar series. This session will be focusing on urban tree equity, green streets, and green jobs. We are so thrilled to have you here with us today. And before we get started, before you strap in and enjoy the ride, we wanted to give you a brief overview of what you can expect to hear today. Today we'll start with a brief introduction from Mayor Eric Garcetti. We'll hear from our City Forest Officer with the Board of Public Works, Rachel Malarich. We'll hear from the LA Department of Water and Power through Craig Tranby, and our resident social scientist with the LA Urban Center, Dr. Francisco Escobedo. Our key presenters today include Edith de Guzman, a PhD candidate with the UCLA Institute of the Environment and Sustainability, and also director and co-founder of the LA Urban Cooling Collaborative. You'll hear from Andy Lipkiss, formerly with Tree People, now the project executive of Accelerate Climate Resilience in LA, who funded our research with Dr. Vivek Chandas, LA's very first urban forest equity visiting scholar. You'll also hear from Keith Mosey, assistant director with Streets LA. A note about the Q&A session. As you can see, there's a Q&A box, and you'll be allowed to ask questions and invited to ask questions following all of these presentations. And we will answer those questions live or directly in written form in the Q&A box. You also have the capacity to upvote or put a thumbs up to express your concurrence with questions. And please do direct your questions to a specific person or presenter so that when we call out your questions and answer them live, we know who you're aiming that question toward. We're really excited after these presentations to host a Green Jobs panel moderated by Dr. Brenda Shockley, Deputy Mayor of Economic Opportunity and Chief Equity Officer. You'll hear from Diego, Star, Leslie, Roberto, and Anna, some amazing friends and colleagues of ours in the City Plants family from organizations that have been greening Los Angeles for generations, and you'll get to hear directly from them. At the very end, Dr. Brenda Shockley will provide some closing remarks to send us home. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mayor Eric Garcetti.
Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I am so excited to welcome you to Growing Vibrant LA Communities. I know that these have been difficult days, and as your mayor, I've felt the fragility and vulnerability and pain across our communities. COVID-19 has touched everything in LA, including our city budget. It's forced us to confront incredibly difficult decisions about services that all Angelenos rely on. But let me make something clear. Even in the midst of this crisis, nothing is more important than the air we breathe. Nothing is more central than the environment we sustain. And nothing is more critical to our vision for Los Angeles than securing a bright and a healthy future for the next generation. That is why we will continue our mission even in the toughest times to maintain and expand our urban forest. We will complete our tree inventory, establish an urban forestry management plan, and we will keep up our work of reaching the ambitious targets laid out in LA's Green New Deal. That work will be more complex than ever, and it will require us to call on every ounce of creativity and innovation and imagination that we can muster. But with the leadership of City Forest Officer Rachel Malarich and Streets LA General Manager Adel Haj Khalil, the extraordinary talent of our entire city workforce, and the initiative of so many wonderful nonprofits and government partners, I have full confidence that we will sustain our investments in urban forestry and create a city that is more equitable, more resilient, and more sustainable for every Angelino. Thank you for all you do, and let's get to work. Hello, everyone. I'm Mayor Eric Garcia.
Good morning and welcome to today's session of Growing Vibrant LA Communities. Today we're talking about tree canopy equity and have a truly phenomenal lineup of presenters that I can't wait for you to hear from. I want to thank the mayor for his leadership and on this issue, and to the team at Streets LA and City Plants for bringing together today's webinar. Every neighborhood in the LA should have access to trees. They are a backdrop to our comings and goings. They are the umbrella that covers us as we stand out on the sidewalk talking to a neighbor or watching our kids play, all the while cleaning our air, buffering the noise of cars and providing a perch for birds in their song, and providing us with improved mental and physical health. When I think about trees and observe them in my day-to-day life, I feel a sense of wonder at their size and structure, the imperfect symmetry of the way their leaves and flowers circle them when they fall to the ground. And while hopefully I've conveyed a little image of how I view trees to start us off this morning, I want to remind us that far too many communities within Los Angeles do not have trees, particularly healthy, large, awe-inspiring ones lining their streets and yards. We know that neighborhoods that don't have access to the benefits and services provided by trees are also communities disproportionately affected by other social and environmental justice issues. It was tree canopy equity that first pulled me into the professional world of urban forestry. A study in 2008 by Dr. Greg McPherson showed the dramatic difference in tree canopy cover across our city, and I had a chance to work in several of the lowest canopied areas, listening to community members and supporting them in developing tree planting projects. In that role, I heard from mothers concerned about hot asphalt playgrounds, neighbors concerned about traffic speeds on their streets and safety in their public parks, and nearly everyone concerned about maintenance of existing trees in their neighborhoods. In the past several years, the city has made additional investments in tree maintenance through the addition of staff within our urban forestry division, and we'll need to continue hiring staff in our urban forestry division and recreation and parks when we are past our current economic crisis. With that, we know that we need to include the building of our workforce of the future in the development of our urban forest management plan and having people prepared to take those jobs. And with that, I'm thrilled to have our youth panel representing organizations that are providing job training and opportunities in urban forestry. We have a lot of work to do to address the issue of tree canopy equity for all Angelinos. But with the clear targets laid out by our mayor and the growing list of partners committing to helping us address this complex issue, I am hopeful. I will remind us that it will take investments in preservation, maintenance, planting, and more than ever, engagement with all of you to build the future forest that will shade our neighborhood streets, improve our economic outcomes, and create healthier communities. With that, I'm going to pass it off to Craig Tranby from Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, who's been one of our key partners in this work addressing tree canopy equity.
Great. Thank you so much, Rachel. Just a few brief remarks today. Our Board of Commissioners and our management are tied up presently in the board meeting itself. So they would love to have shared a few thoughts with you, but I will relay a few things as I can. So LADWP, we're able to fund city plants as an energy savings program, much like our rebates, much like our retrofits programs. We can do this because trees shade buildings and save energy, air conditioning energy, especially in the hottest months of the year. Trees collectively also cool our communities and reduce the urban heat island effect. And there are energy savings and all kinds of other benefits from that. So we're happy to fund city plants. We've been a long-time funder, and we've directed these funds towards achieving equitable outcomes. We've done that in a few ways. We focused on low canopy areas. which also coincide with CAL and virus screen disadvantaged communities. Such things such as locating tree giveaways and grant matching in communities most in need. We've targeted marketing through the Community Outreach Partnership Grant Program for nonprofits in these communities as well. And we provided funding just recently to resource and train tree ambassadors in areas of need. Trees are also strong creators of local jobs. And we've worked with UCLA to show that energy efficiency and city plants can create 13 to 14 local jobs per $1 million invested. This is better than most sectors of the economy. So it's a great, clean, green way to create jobs. I look forward to hearing more today, which can further guide these efforts. I really, really open to further information today. And I thank everyone for your partnership, the co-panelists and presenters, but also everybody who's listening. And now I'd like to hand it off to Dr. Francisco Escobedo, Resident Social Scientist at the LA Urban Center for Natural Resources Sustainability. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. So, as Craig said, my name is Francisco Escobedo. I'm the new research scientist at the LA Urban Center. So with this presentation, I'd like to introduce the center and introduce myself as well. Okay? So as I go forward, I put up the mission of the LA Center. As you can see, there's some interesting words here, right? Information, research, generate science, deliver information, and engage diverse communities, all right, through shared learning. Next slide. So the LA Center came out of a need identified by the city of LA and the Forest Service, and that was to identify the best available science and how to increase shared capacity to address information gaps that has to do with resilience, sustainability, and the urban forests in the Los Angeles area. The vision of the LA Urban Center is to improve and enhance urban natural resource sustainability and the quality of life in the greater LA area. And this slide, I've included kind of the three main lines of action, put it that way. We do research, we convene, but we also do outreach. So in the next slides, I'll give you a couple of examples of the research we do, some of the convening and engagement activities we do, and also some of the outreach. Next slide. When I talk about the LA Urban Center, it's an office, as I'll describe later, but it's also a team. And these are just some of the current members from the executive oversight team. So as you can see, it's a partnership. Originally it was a partnership between the city of LA and the Forest Service, but now it includes state agencies like CAL FIRE, local organizations like Tree People, Amigos del Rio, several offices at the city of LA, the California Urban Forest Council, and of course, city plants. Next slide. So as I go forward, whenever I talk about the LA Urban Center, it's this, right? It's this partnership. It's not just one entity, but several. And to give you an example of some of the research we collaborate in, that we foster and we coordinate, you'll be hearing about some of them. The LA County Tree Canopy Viewer that will be presented. You'll also hear about Vivek Chandis' work. He was the Urban Forest Equity Visiting Scholar. We're currently organizing a fellowship program for students to address needs that were identified by the executive oversight team. That has to do with needs in the Los Angeles area. There's examples of climate-ready tree studies where we're looking at the best species to plant that account for changes in the climate, and other research projects as well. And again, the following speakers will detail some of these projects. Next slide. So also, aside from our research, we do engagement, and we engage with youth. And one of our Forest Service persons located at the center, Yessie Wilkins, there's a lot of this activity, and you'll see the importance of engaging youth. not only as because they're the future of the care of urban forests, but also as a way to make them aware of their environment. And as you will see, the opportunities they create in terms of employment and just awareness raising among the community. Next slide. As an example of the commitment that the Forest Service has placed on this center, there's 2 Forest Service employees, 1 employee, Yassi Wilkins. She's from the State and Private Forestry branch. That's the branch of the Forest Service that works with landowners and land managers that work outside of the National Forest. And then the other branch of the Forest Service, the research branch, and that's myself. I represent the research unit in the Forest Service. Next slide. A little bit about myself. I've been here 5 months. I came from a university in Bogota, Colombia, where I was a professor of socio-ecological systems for the last 5 years. Before that, I was a professor of urban and community forestry at the University of Florida for about 10 years. And before that, I spent several years with the Forest Service as a forester and soil scientist. Some of the research that I'll be doing here, we'll be looking at the economic value of trees and how people pick and choose certain attributes and what their values are to them, the importance of them. We'll be looking at the effects of fire in and around urban neighborhoods that have been affected by fire. And much of this research is with partners from the LA Urban Center, but also partners throughout the state of California. And I'm also working with some international partners. For example, one project, we're looking at how deforestation and armed conflict in Colombia is affecting urbanization processes in the country, but also incidences of malaria. Next slide. So if you have any questions, we're here, we're available. One of the reasons I came here was exactly because of the mission of the LA Urban Center. I think it's truly unique and I'm really excited to be here. If you have any questions, please feel free to email. I gave you a telephone number, but given the current state of affairs, we're all teleworking. So feel free to email me, right? And Yassi or myself will address your questions. All right? So thank you. Next slide. So our next speaker will be Edith de Guzman from the UCLA Institute of Environment and Sustainability and the director and co-founder of the LA Urban Cooling Cooperative.
Thank you, Francisco. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you today. I was invited to share with you some of the efforts that have occurred in our region around making the status of our city's tree canopy easier to understand and access, and to help ground us in the discussion around tree equity. Next slide. Because, as George Harrison famously said in a misquote of Lewis Carroll, if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. And that's where we found ourselves a few years back, lacking data about the lungs of our city, which hampered any efforts to successfully plan for future targets and to plan for management of our urban forest. Next slide. The USDA Forest Service and CAL FIRE heard our request. And because of their support, we were able to assemble a dream team of entities that you see on the screen in order to do a couple of things. First, we conducted a high-resolution assessment characterizing tree canopy down to the parcel level for all of Los Angeles County. And second, we built a web-based publicly accessible portal for exploring the assessments data. Here's a bit more about what we did. Next slide. And Melinda, please spend maybe 3 to 5 seconds on each of the next 5 slides as we go through. Using data collected by LA County and the LA Regional Imagery Acquisition Consortium, we used a variety of data layers that you can see, and go ahead to the next couple of slides, please, including high resolution light detection and ranging data collected from laser mounted on airplanes to derive tree canopy and land cover. The end product was a rich set of data that categorizes LA along 8 classes of land cover, including trees, grass, shrubs, bare soil, water, buildings, roads, and other paved surfaces. Next slide, please. For tree canopy, we were able to look both at existing cover, which is essentially how much of LA is currently covered by trees, as well as possible land cover, or tree cover rather. And that's a measure of how much LA could potentially increase its tree cover too. Next slide. Here's what the analysis looks like by land use type in the city. What the green bars tell us is that the land use that is currently home to the most acres of trees is parcels zoned as residential, followed by recreational and public right-of-way lands. This is important information because it helps us know where to put our efforts to protect existing tree cover. What the orange bars tell us is that these same land uses also happen to represent the biggest opportunities for adding new trees, because there is space to plant significantly in these spaces. This information is important because it helps us to plan for areas that can help LA grow its new tree canopy. Next slide. Here are a couple of other findings from the work that our team did on this assessment. Older homes tend to have more tree canopy. And as you can see by the red trend line, newer homes have far less tree canopy. Now, there are a few reasons for this, including the fact that it takes time for trees to mature. But we are also seeing a trend toward building homes with larger footprints and less space for landscaping, which is having a detrimental effect on our city's urban forest. And as you can see, there is a significant decline in tree canopy in homes built after the year 2000. Next slide, please. Another finding is that tree canopy is positively correlated with the selling price of single-family homes, which means that homes with more tree canopy tend to sell for higher prices. There are a few reasons for this, including the fact that greener neighborhoods do tend to be higher income and thus have pricier homes. But there are a lot of reasons for this that we won't go into today. Next slide. For me, the most eye-opening finding was this one. Each of the rectangles on this slide represents a census block group in the city, which is a geographic unit that is used by the Census Bureau. We found that about a fifth of the city's tree canopy grows where only 1% of the population lives. This tree canopy exists within only 5 census block groups. And though these block groups only account for less than 10% of the land area of the city, they have almost 20% of the canopy of the city. You'll hear much more about this issue of urban forest equity and inequity, and what approaches the city and its partners are taking to address this issue in just a little bit from Dr. Vivek Chandas. Next slide. We were able to take the data from this assessment and make it into sort of an interactive and publicly accessible portal that allows for exploration of the data. And here, I really have to acknowledge the hard work and talent of Dr. Shenhua Jia at Chapman University, who was the architect behind this work. We actually ended up building 2 separate viewers. Here you can see the basic viewer, which allows users to explore tree canopy at various scales, including parcel, zip code, and council district. The viewer lets you see both existing and possible tree cover, and it also gives you a comparison to other parts of the county. Next slide. We also built an advanced tree viewer, which adds all of the other land cover types that I mentioned earlier to the menu of options to explore. And here you can explore how much of a given area of interest is covered by various land cover types and see how that geographic unit compares with other parts of the county. This can give you a good idea of where tree planting might be possible. Next slide. The advanced viewer also has a feature to identify the highest opportunity areas for increasing tree canopy. Areas that currently have low existing canopy and high possible tree canopy are great candidates for prioritizing tree planting. And on this slide, those areas include the green areas, the areas that are marked in green, which, as you can see, includes very urbanized parts of the city and county, which is good news. We would love to see these areas be much better shaded and more resilient to heat. Next slide. You can access both viewers at the link on the screen, and I encourage you to take a look at the story map that accompanies these, also available at that link, which includes a great description of how these tools were developed and how you can use them and what you can do with the data. And it is now my honor to introduce our next speaker, someone who has been a wonderful colleague, mentor, and friend to me, and without whom I would not be pursuing this life path. Andy Lipkus is the founder of Tree People, which has been around for nearly half a century. He's also co-founder of the Los Angeles Conservation Corps. But more than that, Andy is a tree whose roots and canopy have permeated the farthest reaches of the urban forestry and urban resilience movements. His ideas, words, and actions have inspired hundreds of organizations and millions of people to take personal responsibility for their corner of the world. Andy is currently serving as project executive for Accelerate Resilience Los Angeles, which provided generous funding for the project you will hear about from Dr. Vivek Chandas in just a bit. It's not every day that we get to hear the story of urban forestry told by someone who has lived it. And I hope you'll join me in welcoming Andy by giving him the gift of listening with your whole heart. Thank you.
Wow. Well, thank you, Edith, and Rachel, and David, and Dr. Escobedo. It's really a pleasure to be here with you. I am so excited by your collective vision and passion and commitment to heal the land and the people of LA, and to participate with you in this special event, especially because of the focus on youth, green jobs, and urban forest equity. I'm especially moved and humbled by your courageous commitment to identify, confront, and heal the physical causes of still occurring wounds, disease, and deaths that are an ongoing legacy of institutional racism. Those wounds are physical, emotional, social, and economic, and they add up to the very potent cumulative impacts of environmental injustice. What we hear euphemistically called background issues that are responsible for much greater death tolls from COVID-19, as well as heat waves and air pollution across our city. I'm here today to endorse your vision and your efforts and to cheer you on. I believe that we can work as community with people, nature, government to heal the soil, the water, and the air, and to bring a very bright light of hope, love, and action to expose and expunge forever the existence and impact and notion of sacrifice zones here in LA and in communities that learn from your actions. I'm here to also to add strength to your efforts by sharing lessons I've learned from my own failures. Having started work as a teenager, I didn't know much about anything, and I failed at many of my early attempts, as well as throughout my life, including now. I've grown to appreciate that as long as I learned from those failures, they served as compost, rich compost in lessons for success. My excitement was recently really amped, even more when I heard a Sunrise LA youth movement speaker at a climate protest at the LA Department of Water and Power. She brilliantly and eloquently demanded that DWP fully implement their stormwater capture master plan. Implementing that plan would enable LA to source half its water by harvesting and managing the rain, in part by adapting Los Angeles to function as an urban forest watershed, a whole ecosystem approach addressing seemingly separate but very interconnected issues. Implemented in the right way, that urban forest watershed and its canopy would not only save lives by cooling the city, If its implementation included neighborhood food forests, it would enhance food security greatly. Its networked roots in well-composted soil, supported and watered by rain gardens and bioswales and cisterns, networked, would capture, filter, and store abundant water, protect us from flooding and pollution, thus enabling equitable climate safety and potentially tens of thousands of high-skilled green jobs right here in every neighborhood in our city across Los Angeles. Why am I so excited? It's a dream and a goal that many people, including tree people, Edith and I have been pursuing since 1993, to witness youth leaders that found a nearly buried plan and lifted it up to demand that city implement it because of its credible and achievable promise of justice and a safe and hopeful future. Well, it makes my heart sing. But how do we make that happen? Obviously, politics, and the winds are in our favor. The generous, caring people of Los Angeles County have in the past 3 years voted to create 5 funding initiatives that will raise close to $2 billion a year for clean, safe water, parks, housing, streets, and justice. It's a small portion of the funds, if a small portion of the funds are allocated in the right, ecosystematically integrated way, the financial resources are there to make this dream come true. But even with that, achieving and sustaining a dream and a promise this big won't succeed without engaging the entire community's dreams and energies. I want to focus on tree planting and maintenance as an example of initiatives that require sustained community effort and engagement to succeed. And that becomes the foundation for greater success. However, the current challenging reality is the average lifespan of a street tree in the United States is between 7 and 15 or 20 years. Sadly, that's not long enough to establish protective cooling canopy. And we're hoping to hit 40% up from 6% in some neighborhoods in LA. So what do we do? Street trees die of neglect and an increasingly harsh human and physical environment. Even if we could have thousands of people employed in maintenance, that alone would not be enough to save the trees from all the threats. But over my 50 years at Tree People, we learned that when the community engages in dreaming, planning, planting, and caring for the trees and their dream, it's a totally different outcome. Most of the trees live and the fabric of community is strengthened. To illustrate, I want to leave you with the story of Eudora Russell, a retired teacher from Dorsey High School who trained to be a volunteer citizen or community forester at Tree People. After one successful small planting in her neighborhood, she dreamed bigger. She wanted to honor Dr. Martin Luther King by transforming the street named to honor him and his dream. Next slide. She went to LA's mayor, Tom Bradley, and shared her dream. He validated the notion, but in the midst of a budget crisis, he said it would take years and millions of dollars to plant the 7 miles of that whole street. Frustrated, Eudora told me of the challenge, and together we imagined inviting the whole community to share in the dream and make it happen in a day, just to show the power of dream and community. Eudora jumped in and invited Millard Tatum and others to form the King Boulevard Memorial Committee. Tree People hired Fred Anderson, an extraordinarily passionate volunteer and community organizer. And in 6 months, they knocked on every door within a block either side of all 7 miles of the street. They recruited and trained in advance 1,000 planting supervisors who could lead small groups in planting the trees right. And we raised a bit of money. On Dr. King's birthday in 1990, it was raining in LA, but 3,000 people showed up and lined the entire boulevard. At 8 a.m., the official start time, the clouds parted. Next slide. Actually, this slide. Yeah, this is fine. We divided the street into 26 two-block-long neighborhoods, each one of them with leaders, tools, water, a porta potty, and a birthday cake. Next slide. People came from the neighborhood and from across LA. Every tree had a team of 3 to 4 people who dug holes, lovingly placed trees in the ground, and then, next slide. And next slide. And then we invited each participant to take a strand or 2 of their own hair, pluck it out and place it in the hole where the tree could eat it and absorb it. So the DNA of each one of the planters, their dream would become one with the tree, be incorporated in the tree. The team collaborated on coming up with a name for the tree and then held hands and welcomed it to its new home with the blessing, trees need people, people need trees, welcome Mabel, or whoever it was named for. Care and watering of the tree was assigned to someone living within 100 feet of the tree. When Mayor Bradley arrived to plant his tree, he'd driven by all the people stretched across the 7 miles, and he was in tears, never imagining that the people of LA would show up and turn out and work together with so much love. This slide is the day before the planting. Next slide. Here it was. We planted in 1990. Here's 2008. The trees lived. How did that happen? The first day of planting was just the beginning. Knowing that the city's resources were far too limited to provide sufficient care, and at the time, the city only had 2 water trucks to take care of all the trees in the city. We organized the community to come out every month to water, weed, adjust the stakes and ties, and just show up. And here's the result. This slide, and now the next slide. Not only did the trees survive, but they thrived. That's Eudora being interviewed for a documentary. She was always there, as was Jim Hardy, who you see to the right of the screen, Tree People's forestry coordinator at the time. They came out every month with roughly 200 volunteers every month for 10 years. And it gets better. After the civil unrest following the beating of Rodney King and the acquittal of the officers, several buildings burnt along the boulevard, badly scorching the trees. But these trees, selected to emphasize the evergreen nature of Dr. King's dream because of their stature and the resilience and resistance to air pollution and fire, they resprouted from the charred trunks and they survived. It's a beautiful, poetic, but practical echo of the spirit of the community. Years later, that investment by thousands of volunteers was sufficient to save the trees from the axe when the space shuttle came to Los Angeles and was going to drive down King Boulevard, and they planned to cut all the trees. Once officials learned of the human and community relationship with these trees, they decided to spare the trees on King Boulevard. It took an extra 12 hours to maneuver the space shuttle down the 3 miles from Crenshaw Boulevard to the California Science Center Museum, but it was worth the effort. So here's the challenge we all face in conventional wisdom about power. In our individual vulnerability, we tend to think that others have the power to make change and that we don't. I share the story about Eudora and King Boulevard to help eliminate that self-doubt. To raise funds and recruit volunteers for the event, we arranged a press conference where Mayor Bradley announced the plan and invited people to contribute and volunteer. That was 6 months before the event. After he spoke, I was next, but the news crews were already putting away their cameras. I took the mic and said, "It's very important that you heard exactly what the mayor said. He said that this event, this dream will only happen if people contribute some money and some of their energy. He didn't say the city's going to do this." But the paradigm of power served as a filter that blocked the ears of the news people. That night's news and the next day's Times headline was, "Mayor announces the city will plant trees along all of King Boulevard." It was done, and it was impossible to counter that assumption, except with personal appeals. Somehow we raised the needed funds. I wanted to share this story with you and how this community sourced its own power to make lasting change with cooperation with government, but without major investment and control from them. We all have this power. We all make differences with every word we say and every step we take. Once again, I'm inspired by your vision and intentions and encourage you to pursue them with all your passion and all the power within you. Thank you very much. I hand it back to our facilitators. Oh, no, wait, one more slide. Here's what it looks like today, viewed from space. Thank you.
Wow, thank you so much, Andy. That was absolutely incredible. We thank you for your generations and decades of leadership in this city, and for envisioning all of us and grounding us in this work. Thank you so much. And Edith, thank you as well, for grounding us in the canopy assessment. What a powerful set of presentations. We're going to take a few questions from the Q&A. And as a reminder to folks, if you can please direct your questions to either Andy or Edith so I can make sure I know who to ask. So I'll start here with one question. Let's see here. From Bertha Ruiz Hoffman, I think this could be for both of you, given your experiences. How can DAC communities, disadvantaged communities, get help to water trees once planted?
Edith?
Sure. So this is a fundamental question because it is still the case that it's easier to get funding to plant than it is to maintain those trees for the establishment period of 2 to 5 years, depending. I might actually turn it back to Rachel in just a moment here, but we're working with the city and with city plants on exploring the idea of creating tree ambassadors for various communities. And the idea there is to actually hire individuals in the community, folks who have sort of a green vision and some leadership in the community, to come together with their neighbors to equip them with information about the benefits of trees, the needs that trees have, that newly planted trees have in terms of watering, or at least checking if they need water. So we're playing around with that, and we'll be launching a pilot program in the next couple of months to explore whether this neighborhood leader approach works. We've tried other types of things, like we've used different behavior change programming and messaging to see whether it's possible to engage with neighbors just to water the tree that was planted right in front of their homes. And so we're trying to see if there's a way to actually move people toward caring for just that one piece of land right in front of their home. And we're interested in seeing whether that actually can boost resilience to a variety of different types of stressors, not just environmental. So we're actually in the middle of a study right now. And Rachel, maybe you can share a little bit about, what some of the organizations that City Plants works with, but we do have there's another model in the city where we actually do have crews that go out and water trees. So it really kind of runs the gamut and depends on what resources are available. Do you have any other thoughts about that, either Andy or Rachel?
Well, while Rachel's booting up her camera, if she's able to, ultimately, we need the city's help. But back to the community side, Edith, as you demonstrated, it's a lot easier to carry 1 or 2 buckets from your house and water one tree than to rent a water truck or make a water truck. But it's really important that to underscore that in the communities around the LA Conservation Corps headquarters that asked for help in planting when they did, and there was no resources for them, so we put it together. They actually wanting to make sure their trees live. They put 2 barrels on a trailer and made their own little water truck that they hauled around with a car for several years to get their trees established. That's bootstrapping it. But it's within our power. As policy, that's crazy. We can't leave it with that level of risk. But I do want to underscore that when people do it, they can ensure those trees live. But the city really will need to step up and back up the investment. That we all need to speak up for the very strong, more important investment in maintenance than the actual planting.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for that. I think it takes, as Andy spoke to this, a truly collaborative effort between residents and city agencies. A blended model of community forestry pioneered by Tree People, as well as defense and backup from the city, certainly. And thank you, Edith, for mentioning the Tree Ambassador Program. I don't want to take away from your Q&A, but I'm happy to chat about that with folks, and I'll pop my email in the chat. Let's see here, there are so many good questions. I've got one here from an anonymous attendee that I think is a really important issue to speak to and call out. Please comment on the potential issues of green gentrification when trees performing important ecosystem and public health services also result in increased property values. I know it's a little bit outside of the scope of your presentations, but if you wouldn't mind speaking to that, I think it would be powerful for folks to hear.
Sure. So I've actually been diving into this topic a little bit in my own research lately. And there's quite a bit of evidence out there that larger kind of civic greening projects like parks have that effect. It's a little bit less clear. There's less evidence that shows that increasing green cover linearly along streets has that same effect. We do know that more trees in a neighborhood do increase do increase home values, and so that also has a potential for displacement. But in terms of green gentrification and sort of displacing individuals very directly, it's not as clear that tree planting itself does that. However, I would say with the approach that Andy really created, which is one where Tree People and organizations like it don't just come in and do the planting for people, but they engage and equip people within the community who have a green vision to realize that vision. What that does is it creates more social capital. It creates stronger communities that talk to each other, people who, neighbors who trust one another. And that kind of social capital becomes extremely important when there are issues of potential risks of displacement or other types of threats. So, the simple act of planting a tree is not just about having the tree thrive and provide various services. It actually has an empowering, tangibly empowering effect on the strength of communities. So that's what I wanted to share. Andy, I'm sure you have other thoughts about this. You've been dealing with this for decades.
It's ironic that the stark flip side of a sacrifice zone is when you've begun to heal it, it becomes an appealing zone, which is a great thing. And Edith, you're exactly right. That the job of coming together to share a dream and find our strength in community and see it manifest overnight with tree planting has generally not stopped there. It's built that connectivity, which leads to resilience. So neighbors can learn that they can actually ask for help or notice and help each other. And that's from anything. We need to be doing it because of the increased threats of climate disasters that we're experiencing in greater and greater intensity every year. But it has to go to this issue as well. I don't know that we have the tools, and I would hand this off to other city policy leaders to talk about what tools can be put in place to prevent the gentrification and protect the communities. But it's clearly in that body politic that is only strengthened through coming together in something where they can agree on, like trees, as opposed to other more divisive issues.
Yeah, thank you. And I look to, just building off of that, Andy and Edith, look to examples like the TCC Transformative Climate Community grants that Tree People and Northeast Trees are working on in Watts and LA Conservation Corps in Pacoima, that are really working hard to integrate a framework of environmental justice that's community driven into those grants. So including tree planting on a suite of other services that ensure resources stay in the community and address that displacement issue. So thank you so much. And truly, we're gonna have to, unfortunately,
Rachel, if I can just chime in really, really briefly, yeah. I just want to highlight both this question and the other ones coming up in the Q&A just reflects how complex this situation is. It's about engaging communities. It's about making sure that we don't have issues of displacement and gentrification. It's about long-term maintenance. There are so many components involved in addressing tree canopy equity, which is why I'm thrilled today that we have a chance to kind of loop in the larger community into our dialogue around this, as well as have a chance to get these updates on a number of the projects we're working on as we continue to kind of grapple with this issue, take the data, take our history. I think that that's so important. And I really appreciate Andy sharing that story, that context, that what has happened in the past, what we can learn from it. And your approach also, Andy, of just, taking failings as that compost and how we can improve and continue to get better, and why we're having this dialogue with the participants today is, how do we make this better over time? So anyways, I'll let us keep chugging along, but wanted to just chime in that these are not simple issues. And I just appreciate the opportunity with our panelists to be able to continue to dive into them together.
Certainly. Thanks so much, Rachel. And thank you, Andy and Edith. What an honor to have you both here presenting. Andy, I'm going to pass it back to you to introduce the Urban Forest Equity Visiting Scholar that you are supporting.
I would be happy to introduce Vivek Chanda. I don't have the introduction materials, except that I will tell you that I have been stunned and inspired by his work for Los Angeles and beyond, what he's drilled down into with historic institutional racism, promulgating redlining, and dividing up neighborhoods that are still suffering big time because of decisions made a long time ago. And that Vivek has worked with data from around the country and now here in LA, showing that this is real and it is something that we can't deny and need to focus on. So Vivek, I apologize that I don't have your credentials, and but your body of work is doing tremendous job of lifting credibility and attention, and has us poised to help implement the changes. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy. Thank you, Edith. Thank you, Rachel. I would just give a quick shout out to all the communities that were living in the LA region, including the Tongva, the Chumash, and several other indigenous communities that have considered LA home for millennia and were directly connected to the land in profound and spiritually expansive ways. And so this presentation really kind of attempts to build on some of the work that's already happening with the descriptions that Edith and Andy had just so elegantly provided. I have the distinct pleasure to have spoken to several of the communities directly involved in urban forestry, along with my colleague, Austin Kronig, who has been instrumental in assembling this body of work that I'll present today. I want to start a little bit by just acknowledging that these landscapes that we are trying to manage are not just coincidentally developed the way that they are, nor are the built environments in any way just happenstance. So if you go to the next slide, these are landscape legacies, as I've been referring to them, in terms of what we see as the road width, what we see as the sidewalk width, just the real extent of canopy or no canopy. These are things that aren't like a forest ecosystem or a jungle in a sense, where a seed just disperses and starts to grow. In some yards, that may be the case, though generally across the urban landscape, getting a tree into the ground is no trivial process, as you've already heard from so many others. And so if you go to the next slide, part of what we're looking at is trying to understand why one neighborhood might look like this, while another neighborhood may be completely depleted from any kind of urban forest canopy. And so this is part of where our story for understanding LA's urban context really begins. And so if you go to the next slide, I wanted to kind of position this particular place and this particular landscape in such a way that we're really trying to make sense of what it takes to transform a landscape from a highly built out, a highly competitive landscape for physical space to one that attempts to eke out small little pockets of soil, or in some cases, large amounts of soil volume, for being able to surgically implant these green features of the landscape, namely trees. And so part of what we've been doing is working with Accelerate Resilience LA, the City of LA, Tree People, LA Urban Center, and the City Plants Collaborative in trying to unpack what are the multiplicity of issues that are playing together, and having a chance through this particular fellowship to document that, reflect that back to you all so that you can kind of grapple with what are the priorities, what are the places that these particular applications might really take root. And so all the puns in this, by the way, are intended. If you go to the next slide, this really began, if we just start more recent history, with this group here, where we're really trying to work together to discuss some of these big topics. And we meet every other week to talk about these topics. And it's been a really collective, collaborative, incredibly inspiring conversation every other week. And I'm so delighted that we've got this group to be able to really dig into some of these topics. These are nonprofits, these are city folk, these are folks who come in, who are visitors, come in from the private sector, the county, and various community members who are able to get into this. If you go to the next slide. that helps us kind of unpack this complexity. So just to take you back a little bit, you're all probably already familiar with this, though I wanted to just position and represent this in a way that you can kind of wrap your mind around, why are we having these conversations about equity to begin with? Well, in the first slides of Landscape Legacies that I was mentioning, part of what we have done as a society and through federal planning decisions going back to the 1800s, but really I just start in the 1930s with a series of maps that were generated around the country for municipalities, including LA, to divide the city up into 4 distinct what are called grades. So this is an A grade, a B grade, a C grade, and a D grade. And those 4 grades essentially demarcated the extent to which communities were allowed to access mortgages, allowed to access in a sense, wealth and build wealth over time, and other areas that were completely disinvested over this period of time. So this came through a federal agency called the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which really started in the early 30s and then went all the way through to the 1960s. And this federal planning decision essentially codified this segregation that was set up in cities. And LA being as diverse as it is in terms of human population, there was a lot of really interesting specifics of where the red-lined areas, so you see the red patches in this map, it's really where we're talking about the specific areas that were considered red-lined. And those were the areas where communities were not allowed to access homeowners loan corporation or any home mortgages from banks. And it essentially created a legal basis for segregation at that city and at that neighborhood, and even in some cases, street level. And thanks to a group out of University of Richmond that digitized a lot of these maps from around the country, we were able to take these maps and start looking at what was going on in LA and what were the things being said in some of these maps. For example, in this case, the population is made 100% of subversive racial elements with very meager incomes. This was language taken directly from the Homeowners Loan Corporation documents and lend themselves to, for any of you who've gone out and tried to get a loan for doing anything to your home or even buying a home, this was evidence that banks would use to either decide or not decide to invest in a particular place or a particular person or a community. And so what we've been able to find was something that has laid the foundation for cities around the country and is what we argue still affecting communities today. And so you take this and you kind of put this in the lens of trees and what we're talking about today. And we're thinking about this concept of equity. So if you go to the next slide, here's a few graphs that just reflect what we're seeing in the tree canopy across the country. And in LA, it's a little bit more stark, but what we're seeing is this A, B, C, and D. So A is considered, quote, the best neighborhoods. B is considered still desirable. This is technical language in the documentation. C is still declining, and D is hazardous. And so these 4 grades really allowed us to be able to take these maps from 108 different cities around the country and look at the relationship between tree canopy and concrete, essentially the asphalt, the concrete, et cetera, that were part of this landscape. And what we see just overwhelmingly across 95% of the cities that we looked at was that tree canopy was consistently higher in those A-graded neighborhoods. So this is, again, going back to the 1930s through the 1960s, as opposed to the D-graded neighborhoods. And that really set a course, if you will, for what is happening in these neighborhoods in terms of temperature, in terms of ecosystem services, the air we breathe, as Mayor Garcetti was setting the tone, and the environment more generally in terms of what certain communities have access to, clean air, and other communities may not have access to clean air. And that becomes a public health concern. It becomes a much broader concern over how well we're taking care of the communities in our region. And so part of what, if you could just think back as to what Andy was describing in terms of the history of this, if you take it back to the 1950s even, we can start seeing a massive investment in roadways. And LA is no stranger to roadways, which suggests that there was massive amounts of pavement laid across the country And what we started seeing is when you do a cost benefit analysis of where the road's going to go, the engineers often go to the lowest land rent areas of a region. And that's by design, the places that were disinvested over time. And so what ends up happening, and the story becomes a little bit more precise here, is you start getting roadways, industrial facilities, large housing projects, and essentially big box stores, and essentially a lack of green spaces that are really allowed to be present in these D and C neighborhoods. So what that gets us to really this point is recognizing that these areas were demarcated and disinvested in the past. They were then identified as places where large projects would take place, squeezing out the ability to really get tree canopy into these areas. And then what you end up seeing is a current landscape that amplifies temperatures, as this graph on the left would suggest. This is a B, C, and D neighborhoods, green, blue, yellow, and red. And the scale is essentially what we're seeing in tree canopy at the top, and then across the Midwest, Northeast, West, and South. And you see, generally speaking, across the West, across the South, tree canopy is generally consistently lower in those degraded neighborhoods. Go to the next slide. We wanted to take this and look across the across numerous cities, and we wanted to create this thing called a community engaged neighborhood tree equity ratio, which allows us to see over time from 1984 to 2019 what's the general trend of tree canopy going on in these particular areas, A, B, C, and D. And what the ratio is it's essentially the amount of greening happening in an A and B area versus a C and D area. So a simple ratio that allows us to say, well, if communities are highly prioritizing the A and B neighborhoods, as have been done for the last century, then we would be moving closer to 2.0, as opposed to if a city or region is emphasizing much more of the C and D neighborhoods, we'd be closing in on 1 or even 0. And so what we're seeing in LA here is a very kind of lopsided tree equity distribution here, where from 1984 to about 2004, there was actually planting happening, though the planting was happening much more in the A and B areas. So the greening was happening much more in the A and B areas. And that makes a lot of sense, in part because those are the areas that are the easiest for us to get trees into the ground, lots of parkway space, lots of green spaces in general, as opposed to the C and D areas that will require a lot more effort to get a tree into the ground, which we'll talk about in a minute. And so if you go to the next slide, last set of graphs, I promise, in this next slide, I'm gonna go from the left to the right here, where when you look at what's actually on the landscape in these A, B, C, and D areas, we start seeing that in the A areas, there's a lot more low density development, which generally means that this is using satellite imagery from a data set called the National Land Cover Data set from the United States Geologic Survey, which tells you essentially in a region, what is the distribution of different types of land cover. And what you can see here is that in the D areas, we have much more high density development and medium density development, and much less of the low density development, as opposed to the A areas, which is much larger in developed open space and low density development, which allows us then to say, wow, if there's more space there, then it's likely going to be much more likely to be planted with trees. So there's a kind of a gravity model, if you will. It's pulling more of the trees because there's just more available space. In the middle graph, we're seeing A, B, C, and D again. And what this shows, and the axis got cut off here, but what this shows is percentages of population change over time. So again, if you think about the y-axis here, the up and down, as the amount of population growth over time between 1984 and 2018, essentially. What we're seeing here is the D areas were the places where the greatest number of populations or population growth occurred over this period of time of 35 years. And in the A areas, we had far less increase in population. So again, we're seeing the similar pattern play out here. And then finally, the graph on the far right is the amount of the amount of temperature reduction with just an increase of 10% of greening in the A, B, C, and D neighborhoods. And this is a paper that's will be coming out in a couple of months here, where we're essentially saying that if you plant trees in the D neighborhoods, we're actually seeing a likely larger decrease in temperature than if you were to necessarily plant in A neighborhoods. Intuitively, that would make a lot of sense, I suspect, to many of you, because we're essentially saying that places that are really built out, if you get trees in there, we'd see the likelihood of temperatures going down much more quickly. So again, the last 3 graphs I'm going to show, and I want to get a little bit into the so what question in my last 10 minutes here. So based on these data sets and kind of background information, go to the next slide. I want to present you with at least 3 provocations. And that is, what we're seeing in the data is that the same systems that created these inequities have not changed since the inception of redlining policies. We've done a tremendous amount to address policies that have systematically privileged one group while deprivileging or disinvesting in other groups. And that system fundamentally is what we're trying to change with folks like Rachel Malrick and others who are involved in this process. And second is, I want to suggest, or at least provoke by suggesting that simply moving trees into disinvested neighborhoods can further amplify existing inequities. So it's communities, think about communities that have consistently been having freeways run through their neighborhoods, consistently having the city or region doing things to them without involving the community themselves. And that builds a tremendous amount of distrust, as we've seen not only in LA, but across the country over time. The displacement likelihood and economic insecurities that we're hearing about can be exacerbated. And of course, the likelihood of trees actually surviving is also in question, where you might have people saying, I didn't want this tree here, and cutting it down as a result. So we have these behaviors occurring across the urban landscape that would likely require us to be far more thoughtful, mindful, and deliberate about how we're engaging the communities in these specific neighborhoods where we're thinking about greening. And then finally, trees are needed our community-based neighborhood scale involvement and campaigns that can center on current needs and sharing, specifically sharing of maintenance, sharing of potential involvement and stewardship in those places. So that's really where this work is going. If you go to the next slide. Starting with those 3 provocations, there's some really interesting work in this. I'd love to get into this more with you, and I will in a minute. Though what we're essentially trying to do in essentially in addressing these inequities is really looking to not erase or overlook these past atrocities that have been done to communities without any involvement of their own agency, as Andy and Edith were just describing. We're also seeing that the civil rights movement that has been active and ongoing has been really distinct from the urban conservation movement. And what we're really talking about is things that have been separate, unequal for most of the last century, if not longer. And we're trying to actually have a direct conversation about this, again, not only in LA, but around the country right now. And third, I want to think about about addressing inequity through not just planting trees, and that the idea that treeless places are incomplete. We really need to think about what is it that's contextually important for that place, and we'll get into that in a minute. And just putting trees in that place and considering it progress might actually be something we want to think about very carefully when we're thinking about the long-term survivability and the other issues that I was just bringing up. One of the challenges that's also come up is this issue of transactional relationships, where it's essentially a long history of very exploitive planning practices. As a planning scholar, I've seen this play out in communities around the country, and it's maintained, as opposed to developing mutually beneficial or mutually reciprocal ones with communities. And finally, most challenging is that in a system where money is so central, that the benefits of expanding tree canopy and putting monetizing benefits to tree canopy can really further deepen some of these inequities, because we're starting to talk about what are the monetary differences that are happening and how are some communities more poor, and the whole system really kind of is challenged in and of itself, because we're putting that dollar value on a tree. And so again, a little provocative, but again, something we need to probably be thinking very carefully about if we're talking about inequities, because we already have an uneven playing field to begin with. Next slide. So all of this is kind of compiled together in a report that we're releasing today as part of this conversation. It's called the Los Angeles Urban Forest Equity Assessment Report, and it just dropped last month to the core group that I was mentioning earlier, though is going to be available to you more generally coming up after today. We were able to interview over 35 individuals and over a dozen organizations representing urban forests in the LA region for this report. And what we're really able to do, Austin Kronig and I, were to identify some of the converging themes, which are about funding and about coordination, community response and maintenance and care, and then some themes that really diverged. When we heard different people saying right tree, right place, we were finding people were meaning very different things when they were saying that, even though it's a very common moniker in the urban forestry literature. Individual versus collective action, that's another really complicated, divergent theme. Some were saying, you know, work with individuals, go knock on doors. Others were saying, no, we need to rise up as a collective. Were really divergent in what we heard. And then finally, the ecological implications, the idea that, you know, what is it from a native species planting versus a non-native tree planting? Those were things that were coming up as divergent themes as well. Again, I'm going to be just covering this at a relatively high level. I encourage you to check out this report that'll be available to you that gets into this in 40 thick, interesting pages. Next slide, please. We were able to find a few quotes that we were able to pull out from different organizations that we interviewed, some of whom are on this call, including trees need to be seen not as a luxury, but as essential on every corridor. That was something that came up multiple times. And also we're not there to decorate. We're there to address and heal community pain. So this is going back to the inequities that we were bringing up earlier. And then another representative quote was, making a connection to public health is going to be one of the best ways we can mobilize the underserved communities of color. And so it was these comments were very compelling for us in terms of trying to think about recommendations and takeaways, which is the next slide, please. We really wanted to think about this notion of equitable financing. And I'll just, in a brief nutshell, just say that, you know, putting a tree into an historically A or B graded neighborhood, far less money, far less carbon intensive. Though when you think about this multiple benefits approach, the notion of equitable financing is more of a long-term plan to think about what is it that we can do to invest the resources into areas that have been disinvested over time. So in a way, you could almost think about it as makeup dollars for what has been done to communities and affected them over time, not just in terms of wealth creation, but also in terms of environment and health and well-being. Maintenance co-ownership, we have a fair number of suggestions for that. In the report, trees as inclusive infrastructure, so thinking about how to involve communities directly in the creation of green infrastructure across the LA region. What's realistic? So this is about, can you do this in one neighborhood? If you do this in one neighborhood, what are the things that need to be considered when you scale this to other neighborhoods? And also we're hearing a lot about how do you get multiple generations of people involved in the stewardship of the landscape, in the caring of trees. And that was something that came up in a set of takeaways that we'd identified. And then finally, the right of way is a highly contentious space. And how do we think in terms of urban forestry as participating in reclaiming some of that right of way so that we can find the appropriate avenues for expanding the urban forest into communities that haven't had the opportunity to have forests. Next slide, please. So what we're doing as a collective here, as a urban forestry collective group that's meeting every other week, is we're trying to think about what are the planting models, and we're talking about distributional equity factors, we're talking about physical site characteristics, and we're taking a set of factors and really kind of weaving them together to try to identify what are the specific places we can think about planting trees. And together and working with other members of the city and county, we've been able to identify many characteristics that are really helpful in the development of an assessment tool for putting a tree in a specific location that might have historically been disinvested. And so if you go to the next slide, you'll see as I wrap up my piece here, what we've done is divide this up into a 3-tier model, where tier 1, it's relatively straightforward. There's no site modification needed. The canopy goals can be met, and it's basically being able to get a crew out there, getting a tree and getting it planted, and then of course the maintenance and care that happens afterwards. Tier 2 is a bit more complex in that there are physical infrastructure challenges. There's potentially community engagement challenges in an area, and to think about developing a plan for how do you bring trees into a community and have a set of minimal site modifications that would allow trees to actually take root. And then finally, tier 3 is the more substantive level of modification that would be needed. This might be a time where there's some rezoning happening in a neighborhood. There might be a transportation project happening. And these are places where you really can think about how do you involve multiple bureaus in a city, involve multiple community members and organizations to be able to think about the types of changes that would happen in a landscape to further green that particular location. So potentially policy modifications as well as site modifications on a more substantial level is the kind of 3rd tier of tree planting that we've come to. Next slide, please. Just to give you a visual of this, we kind of arrayed on the left side graph here the effort or investment on the left side with some dollar values that we were able to glean from the literature. And then on the right side, or on the x-axis, the bottom, the amount of greening. And so from here, what you can see is, public easements and median strips, they might require a bit more investment, but potentially offer more greening, whereas backfilling tree wells or adopting a tree giveaway programs might be less effort, though potentially not as much greening as well. So we're really trying to hit that sweet spot of kind of the effort, investment, and greening relationship. And this image on the right is kind of a video, a means of walking through one of the neighborhoods that were identified that has historically disinvested, and identifying through visual cues what might be places for planting trees where there might allow space as well as policy allowances for getting trees into these locations. So let me close out this last slide by essentially putting forward a few ideas. If you go to the next slide, please. Few ideas or major questions for consideration. I'd want to reflect back to you. Existing policies and financing systems makes planting in disinvested areas more expensive. How might that change? What are the disincentives for getting trees into disinvested places? Without a history of tree planting and maintenance in disinvested areas, how might community engagements enable maintenance and ownership models for ensuring viability of newly planted trees? So there's a whole bunch of work that needs to be done there. Potentially what we'll hear from the youth a little bit later today, the youth panel a little bit later today may offer some insights. And then finally, what are promising practices for creating inclusive streetscapes in disinvested areas of the city? Another thing that I think is really food for thought. So I've come around to my full time here, and I want to leave space for furthering this discussion, of course, deepening it with you all. So next slide, please. And I'll just close out with putting my contact info if you want to get in touch, and I'll turn it over to you, Rachel. Thank you for the opportunity and honor to be able to at least reflect on some of the work we've been grateful to participate in with you all.
Wow, Vivek, thank you so much. What an honor to have you as our Urban Forest Equity Visiting Scholar here in LA, and thank you for that wonderful presentation. I've got a few questions lined up, although I know we're short on time. And just for a heads up for folks, I did pop the report that Vivek mentioned in the chat. So all of you can access that and feel free to dive into the work that Vivek is speaking to today and what he's been up to as our visiting scholar here in Los Angeles in greater detail if we don't get to your questions. One question from Melinda Augustina here. She said, Melinda asks, since our city and planet is in a state of crisis, is there an immediate benefit to move larger or more mature trees in larger planters into the level D neighborhoods until the concrete can be removed and trees planted in the ground? I know I would be willing to donate trees for such a cause. think you're on mute, Vivek. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that's a big one. I know I've been hearing from various folks in Washington, D.C. and other places about being able to temporarily put trees in places with barrels and with other kind of features on the landscape until resources are available to expand it. I have yet to see that actually in place. If LA wanted to experiment with it, I think the feedback I've received is that it could be potentially it could be potentially labor intensive, and then just dropping trees in a place and kind of leaving them without actually engaging the surrounding communities in some form could be potentially challenging as well, as we've seen in other cities where trees have just kind of been dropped in, parachuted in, if you will. So I'm really advocating for this kind of community, this bottom-up approach that really ties together with the systems that are in place, and similar to what Andy and Edith were describing earlier, that allows for that integration of the systems that we have with the community's interest provoked with the tree planting. So totally possible. I think it could lend itself to some logistical challenges that Rachel or others might know more about.
And I'll add to that just two things. One is, again, our knowledge and understanding of tree biology. They want to have room for their roots to grow out and spread and be able to provide that investment that returns that benefit to us over time. I want to see long-term investments, not ones that are going to just be there temporarily and move away. But that being said, I think everything's on the table at this moment. If hearing Vivek's presentation, you hear how many things we have to consider. And so we will be discussing all options as we continue to look at how we address this issue. But I personally don't love the idea of dropping in big trees in planters because of some of the maintenance considerations, especially since the great thing about trees is that they appreciate over time. And when we provide those significant investments in our communities with creating the site conditions for large trees to be planted, we're really putting something there that will give us a lot of benefits over time. But we know that it's going to take some time to get there to those tier 3 locations for the communities where just planting vacant locations isn't enough, and we need to have some modifications to the site. It's going to take some time to develop the policies that are going to get us there. And so we will have to explore any number of options.
I love it. And that's one of the things you're tasked with as our city forest officer, and have been doing a great job at, Rachel, is integrating all of the departments that touch trees and making sure that there's cross-pollination and coordination across agencies and nonprofits and communities in Los Angeles. I want to ask more questions. I'm afraid to say that I think we're out of time. But that being said, for the folks who have questions specific for Vivek and Rachel in the chat, highly encourage you to read the report and reach out to either Vivek or myself or any of the LA partners who are involved in this project, and we'd be happy to touch base with you offline about that. Before we hand it off to Streets LA, if you can go to the next slide. We want to invite you all to do a quick stretch break with Leafy. We know you've been sitting here for about an hour and a half now, and it's important to move your body and be active. So stretch break, get up, move your body, have a laugh at our tree mascot, leaf mascot of LA. And with that, Vivek, thank you so much for your time today. And I'm happy to now introduce Keith, Chief Racial Equity Officer from Streets LA.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining. I'd like to thank Dr. Vivek and Andy Lipkiss for their stories of powerful history and memories, and of course, mentioning the great school, Dorsey High School. Thank you for that. My name is Keith Mose. I've been at Streets LA for over 31 years. Today, I'm going to talk about COVID, its constraints, SIP retirement, racial and gender equity. Next slide. Executive Director. Thank you. Next slide, please. And Racial Equity Task Force, and how that ties into trees, shade, and equity, and how it drives us in as far as our work plans going forward. So basically, the COVID, constraints, Streets LA is still out there working, trimming trees, fixing sidewalks, repairing streets. One of the constraints was that basically, due to the mayor's stay-at-home order, we basically went from doing work in residential streets, say when it came to street paving, into doing more commercial corridors to reduce our impacts into neighborhoods and things like that. The other constraints are basically the city's budgets as far as receipts have gone down, or become pretty bad. And so with that, there's a lot of budget constraints and cutbacks that are impacting us in our services. And we've also seen, the impacts of COVID within our workforce, basically, and we've taken measures to basically keep our employees as safe as possible. But with that being said, during the summer months, we saw the death of George Floyd. And so the mayor, enacted Executive Directive 27, which called on each city department to implement an action plan that would diversify the workforce and ensure racial equity. And so from that, Streets LA, we generate a racial equity task force and an action plan. Next slide, please. So from that, basically, Streets LA enacted our racial equity listening sessions. And so we let our employees call in anonymously and basically tell us what they thought of racial equity and what they thought about the Bureau and the city as a whole. And one of the things that we found in these racial equities, listening sessions was that people, wanted more opportunities for education, training, and basically a transparent, fair process during our hiring process. And so this is very valuable to us. And so from that, we included as part of our racial equity plan going forward is to have fair interview panels and provide more access and training to all of our employees, to include actually going through our Street Managed Technology program, which is free in college credits that they get. So that way, this will improve our workforce through education and training, and at the same time be transparent during our entire hiring process. Next slide, please. One of the other things that we do is we also look at a diverse recruitment, and we looked at that as part of our racial equity plan. And so we have our Target Local Hire, TLH, our Transportation Foundation of LA internship program, TFLA, and historically Black colleges and universities and gender recruitment. So with our Target Local Hire, we've had great success over the past few years in hiring people from the communities, from local, schools and things like that to come into our workforce. And all these people have taken advantage of our Street Managed Technology program and have actually gone from, say, a labor position up to, equipment operators, other positions, and have basically, gone up the career ladder, so to speak, in the past several years. So this has been a very successful program. And with that also being said, our Transportation Foundation of LA, our college student intern program, is also a very successful program for us. We have these, persons work for us for 3 years until they graduate. And so what we find with, with the youth coming in through this particular program, that they're very highly motivated, energetic, and have a grasp of, the latest technologies. Also, we really truly believe in going to the historical Black colleges and universities to basically do recruitment for engineers. And that's a workforce population that has been overlooked historically as Black engineers. And so we actually go out and recruit and do on-the-spot hiring for these persons as far as minority groups at historically Black colleges, to bring them on into the city to basically, improve as far as opportunities from there. And we also have the Hires LA's youth program, where youth at risk or dropping out of high school or in the foster system or homeless. We want them to explore city careers as well. And so we're doing a lot of things to basically reach out, as far as and improve our recruitment process to local schools. We want to reach out to local high schools, colleges, universities, basically to recruit more people from the community themselves. Next slide, please. Now, how does this all tie in? With Streets LA, one of the things that we're doing is we're basically using data. And so we want to use data about, to basically look at equity, to share our service priorities. We want to also address shade, because we look at shade as an equity issue also. We look at, and we want to provide designs and transit amenities as in a more equitable fashion. Because when somebody's standing out on a bus stop and there's no shade, that's a very, daunting thing. So we want to create not only tree canopies, but in our transit shelters, we want to basically provide shade and even hydration stations, hand sanitizer stations at our transit stations. But at the same time, we're looking at data basically to guide us in our decision-making process, to look at areas of need. We know that in the minority, low to moderate income neighborhoods, that there are a lot of vacant tree wells. There are a lot of just bus stops with no shelters and things like that. So we want to prioritize our disadvantaged communities to provide this shade equity. That's very important to us that we provide this. And we're also looking at other cooling techniques as far as in some of our pavements, as far as doing cool slurries, things like that, to help reduce the temperatures in neighborhoods, to go with shade as equitable. Next slide, please. So we have our actions plans and service deliveries. And so, with our racial equity plan, it's not just us making the decisions. We want to reach out to you, the stakeholders, to help advise us on how we basically create this equitable action plan. We also reach out to neighborhood councils, and we also want to use the 311 system. But we want to, increase the dialogue with local communities, persons like yourselves, and basically where we need to provide services as it relates to empty tree wells and other things of nature to improve communities. Because not only do we believe in fixing sidewalks, trimming trees, and paving streets, but we look at this as an equitable issue as far as in a quality of life. We want to improve the quality of life for all. And also we know that it provides an aesthetic calming value as far as when you have more trees, paved streets, nice sidewalks. It also increases home value. So we recognize that. So we want to work with local community groups to improve on that as best we can. Next slide. And next slide. And so we're working on using an asset investment methodology. We look at the need, the analysis, and the impact of our deliverables. And we wanted a methodology that examines community needs and those of those needs that would be the most impactful. Once we identify those impactful needs, what are the resources that are needed to deliver that? And so we're looking to allocate these resources, and basically we want to be fair. And basically we're not looking at one neighborhood versus another. We're looking at areas of needs and the impacts and how we can really deliver those services. Next slide, please. We're also looking at other things with asset management as far as it relates to safety, public health needs, and sustainability. So we're looking at, crash, the high entry network, bicycle lanes, pedestrian walking space, mobility as a whole. And we're looking at, how to improve safety, how to improve public health, and do these things that are sustainable for, for the community to make, the community safer, more sustainable. Next slide, please. And so with that, we're doing, equity analysis, we're doing demand analysis, and we're doing function analysis. In these critical facilities and lifeline systems, population density and things like that, we're looking at a displacement index area, are the data that demonstrates pressure that quantifies the likelihood that communities may be pressured to leave their current neighborhoods due to rising housing costs or ongoing development. We're looking at the vehicle access data that demonstrate existing measures of socioeconomic disadvantage with transportation and public transit-oriented measures, such as access to personal motor vehicles associated with lower likelihood of using public transit. So we're looking at a variety of things to basically, how we can invest back into communities, low to moderate income communities. Next slide, please. And so with that, next slide. Okay, thank you. And so with asset investment methodology and impact analysis, is there a criteria we should add to or remove from this list? And so, in the questions and answers, kind of answer that question. What can we do to improve? We want to hear from you. We're not doing this monolithically, just for ourselves and basically, and not answering to anyone. We answer to you, the community, the tree people. We want to hear from you. We want to know where we can improve our services and what we need to add or remove from that. And next slide. I know I'm supposed to go to questions and answers, but before we do that, I would like to introduce Deputy Mayor of Economics Opportunity and Chief Equity Officer, Brenda Shockley. Thank you for your time.
Keith, we can answer a couple of questions that are directly sent to Streets LA.
Sure.
Okay. We have one from Elizabeth Allaire. Does the city of Los Angeles have private property tree ordinance?
That I would have to look at and get back to you. Maybe Rachel, you may be able to help me out with that question.
So we do have a protected tree ordinance that protects a limited number of species, and I actually was trying to answer a couple of these questions in the Q&A box. Our tree preservation strategy as a city is one of the 3 items that I'm really focusing on this year, looking at how we make sure that we have a really comprehensive, thoughtful process for prioritizing tree preservation. We already have our street trees are protected and require a permit for removal, as well as replacement when they're removed. But overall, we're taking a look at our tree preservation strategy as one of those 4 pillars of urban forest management. Those folks that have been tracking my Lunch and Learn series know that investments in tree planting, maintenance, preservation, and community engagement all have to be happening in order for us to have a really healthy urban forest. It's another key component. So I hope that answers the question.
One more question, and then we'll conclude with the Streets LA presentation. From Marianne King. Does the potential for LA include asphalt medians and ongoing unnecessary middle turn lanes? The roadways are so wide that trees in the middle will help to shade and reduce urban heat islands versus just along the sideway.
So I'll quote Rachel from earlier, everything's on the table. So we're looking at different things we can do with median islands to basically improve upon them, whether, potentially, some type of shrubbery or tree planting can be included in that, or some type of, because we have to also look at, how we maintain, median islands and things of that nature. But everything is on the table. We could always look at that. Rachel, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, I think, that's part of the conversation that has to happen, is looking at our public right of way and the different needs in that space. I know we're talking about trees specifically today, but there's multiple infrastructure components to our public right of way, the street side and the parkway spaces. So medians definitely are a space. I actually think about this sometimes when I'm out walking, sometimes median trees provide us some additional shade on the sidewalk, because the trees that are actually in the parkway space might be having the shade higher up. So definitely something that we're talking about and considering, along with, again, that larger understanding of the whole context of this really, it's a full space, right, Keith? I mean, you guys are managing so many different pieces of infrastructure.
And we manage everything within the right of way from, curb to curb, basically, or sidewalk to sidewalk. So yes, everything's on the table. We're looking at different ways we could provide better service, more amenable service, and better things to maintaining our infrastructure.
Well, thank you. Now we can introduce Dr. Brenda Shockley.
So I'll start over. Brenda, our Deputy Mayor of Economics, Opportunities, and Chief Equity Officer, Ms. Brenda Shockley.
Okay. Thank you. Can you hear me? Am I coming through?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Keith. And I really want to commend the department. I'm sitting here and actually commend you on this entire webinar. I had the chance to come in sort of right before my part, but I'm like, I need to really understand this. And I want to start at the beginning. And it's been my pleasure to be on since 9:30 this morning and looking at how thoughtful, how careful, how much commitment and passion there is for the world we live in, for the day-to-day moving about. And to have another of many opportunities to hear from Andy Lipkiss, Andy, who in our vintage is indeed an icon. He is the climate and environmental icon for those like me who've been around working in the nonprofit sector, working in community development for many years. I really don't want to take away any time from our youth panelists. I would only say these 3 things. One is Executive Directive 27, which was perfectly described. I just want to emphasize that it has three big parts to it. One is the employment and training and recruitment and retention of city employees, because the mayor referred to it as racial equity in city government. But it also very much includes service delivery, the equitable distribution of resources and services, and finally, contracting, which will drive us into our panel, the contracting that is associated with the cities doing business and the ability for all who are interested to have the opportunity to compete. I also feel very strongly, and I think many of you are aware, that our newly elected president, Joe Biden, when he established and set forth the 4 equal priorities for this administration, besides the pandemic and the economy, climate and racial justice. And I think that certainly what I've heard here and what we are able to do going forward is to show the intersectionality and particularly address what has been promised, at least in the last many years that I can think of, the advent of green jobs that will give people who in the past have not had an opportunity to work or have not been able to find work again, that there will be green jobs at a livable wage that will allow people to not only do what's in the best interest of our planet, but also be able to provide for themselves and their families. So with that, I would really very much like to introduce what I think of as the future of all that we do. The young people who are willing to be panelists, who have developed their own sense of responsibility and have made their way here to be with us today. I'm honored to start with Star Brock. Star is a core member of LA Conservation Corps. Star is 22. She's originally from South Central Los Angeles. She's been stewarding LA's urban forestry stewarding LA's urban forestry as a core member with the Los Angeles Conservation Corps for 2 years, helping to beautify her neighborhood and other surrounding communities. With the LA Corps, Star has built low-income homes, plants trees, and maintains newly planted trees to make beautification and change happen throughout Los Angeles. Welcome, Star. Next, Roberto Leon. He's an environmental specialist. He's with Korea Youth and Community Center. Robert is 24 years old and is born in East LA, but raised in Southeast Los Angeles. Robert's interest in urban forestry started when he was 13 as a volunteer for Tree People. He continued volunteering in urban greening projects and began working with Tree People in 2017 as one of their first youth tree care associates for their Southeast LA satellite office. In that role, he led volunteer events and helped plant over 1,500 trees and distribute 2,000 fruit trees. He's been working at KYCC for about a year, and when asked about his job, Robert shared, "It has probably been the best work experience I have ever enjoyed in my life. Urban forestry really made me change in so many ways in life and has helped me to develop into a better man. I never would have guessed that planting trees would have opened so many doors for me and gifted me with so many great friendships. I would say that urban forestry saved my life at some point. So thank you, Mother Nature, for your beauty and efficiency." Next. Leslie Medina, core member of the City Plants Griffith Park Nursery and LA Conservation Corps. Leslie Medina is 18 years old and grew up in El Sereno, but she currently lives in Burbank. As a core member with the LA Conservation Corps, Leslie supports the City Plants Griffith Park Nursery site and assists with the LA DWP funded Tree Yard Tree Delivery Program. During COVID-19, Leslie has helped roll out the curbside free tree adoption program for the City Plants Collaborative. Leslie has been with LACC for 6 months and shares it has been the best experience. Welcome, Leslie. Anna Carlin, Environmental Specialist 2 with Korean Youth and Community Center. Anna is 28 and was born in Mexico. She was in the California Conservation Corps for 3 years. She was part of a team that focused on emergency response for fires, floods, earthquakes, and more. In her time at CCC, she worked on beautification projects in South Los Angeles and removed invasive species along state park trails. As an environmental specialist too, Anna maintains and plants new trees throughout LA. Anna has been working with KYCC for 3 years, and she is very proud of her work. As Anna says, it's a great honor to work for an organization that not only helps the environment, but the community as well, one that leads as an example. Thank you, Anna. Next, Diego Zapata, nursery manager and community organizer, Northeast Trees. Diego Zapata is a community organizer and applied biologist in Northeast and East LA who strives to advocate for greater access to open space and nature-based education for his neighborhood's multi-generational community members. He currently manages the Northeast Trees native plant and tree nursery at Ascot Hills Park to protect the Los Angeles's vulnerable relic plant populations and to support community-led restoration efforts throughout the county. To realize more environmentally just communities throughout the city. Let me say that again. To realize more environmentally just communities throughout the city. Diego empowers local youth to engage in urban greening to ensure a greener and more equitable city remains accessible to all. Thank you, Diego. Next, is there? I'm there. So welcome to all of our panelists. Thank you so much for committing your time and your energy to this webinar. To each of you, and I will have you go in the order, I think probably is best, the order that you were introduced. The question is, how do you get involved? How did you get involved in urban forestry, and what do you enjoy about your role?
Good morning. I got involved when I first enrolled into the Corps. Basically, that was just like my job title, so I had to. And I enjoy the fact that like I get to make a difference in like a lot of the lives of the people who live in Los Angeles, and I get to interact with the people who live in this area, and like I get to make a difference and make a change in my community.
Thank you, Star. Next.
Good morning. I got involved with urban forestry. It all started when my best friend invited me to a tree care volunteering event, and I really didn't think of it much. I was just basically there trying to hang out with friends, and then little did I know, I started falling in love with the work that we were doing, and I kept on it for years. And the thing that I enjoy about my role is that I get to basically give back to my community, and it was a blessing that I was able to give back to the community in which I grew up in. And now I'm extending out to other regions that I never thought I would have been extending out to. And I just love seeing the look in people's faces whenever they see that we actually care about them and all.
Thank you. Wonderful. Next.
Hello, my name's Leslie, and I got involved in urban forestry when I joined the Corps. I was able to grow a lot of knowledge with urban forestry, and I've been involved with the Yard Tree Delivery Program. in which we are able to make a difference in the communities of Los Angeles by providing free trees to residents to plant in their properties. Um, this is very important to me because during these times you are home a lot of the time. So having trees in your property gives you the motivation to go out and be out in nature and see the beauty of the trees.
It's great. Thank you. Next.
Hi, good morning. How I started working, I started in the CCC, the California Conservation Corps. During that process, I was able to help a lot of the community towards making more trail work for them to walk on. Their, you know, and then after that, I wasn't able to finish my other process to continue working there. So I had to leave the CCC and get involved in another company or find another job. I ended up finding a job where I was more working in the office and something I'm not used to, something I didn't really like. And then a good friend of mine told me about KYCC. She asked me to apply. Once I applied, I just waited for them to give me that interview. Once I got the interview, I was able to come and join this great team. After that, it was just learning each day, step by step, how to maintain the trees, how to speak to people, give them the right information. It's just an everyday learning experience for me, especially when you have somebody from the community to come talk to you and ask you why are you planting this tree? Why is it so important for us to water this tree? Or why is it important for us to ourselves to water the tree? And that gives us a great opportunity to communicate with the community and give them that information as well. So that's something I particularly love about working for KYCC.
Great. Diego?
Hi, everyone. So my current career working in urban forestry was a culmination of multiple passions of mine. I would say it all really started with my time as a kid interfacing with the living systems of my community. I grew up in Lincoln Heights, which is, despite being one of the most environmentally unjust communities of LA, is also characterized by this wonderful juxtaposition between the urban and beautifully resilient walnut woodland at an open space we call Flat Top. Those hills, shaded by the canopy of some of the most glorious oaks and walnuts in our entire city, taught me a lot about what I know now as an applied biologist that actively seeks to protect my community's open spaces. When these hills became threatened by development, my passion for biology naturally dovetailed into community advocacy work with organizations like the Southeast Asian Community Alliance to not only elevate my community's right to nature, but also to an affordable and environmentally just city. After graduating high school, I went on to pursue a bachelor's degree in biology, all whilst remaining inextricably connected to this type of community organizing work by promoting access to nature-based education for my fellow youth. Now I continue to work at the intersection of urban forestry and community advocacy by empowering youth to actively protect and enhance our open spaces and our city's biodiversity as a manager of Northeast Trees' native plant nursery.
That's great. Thank you so much. Next question. We're going to work backwards. Diego, since you're still there, we'll work backwards from that. What's your day-to-day? What do you do day-to-day?
Every day at the nursery is vastly different from the other. As an applied biologist, educator, and operations manager, I wear lots of different hats to ensure that the nursery continues to produce essential plant material to support Northeast Trees' many greening projects throughout the county. And also to creatively engage with the community in providing opportunities to learn about nature. Some days are full of seed collection and processing endeavors at park spaces throughout Northeast LA. Some days I'm facilitating hands-on workshops with youth regarding local biology over Zoom, or I'm on panels like this. And some days are a lot more administrative or policy oriented. The truth of it all is that a nursery never stops growing. There's always more work to be done as soon as a task is completed. Because I'm so passionate about this type of work, the fine line between work and my personal life is usually very hard to discern. Regardless, having the privilege of working in my own community, serving as a mentor of sorts for people who are only a few years younger than myself, and truly making lasting impacts on the well-being of our city's urban canopy and biodiversity, for generations to come, honestly, is truly the most humbling and fulfilling part of my day-to-day work.
Thank you. Anna, what's your day like? Are you muted, Anna?
Sorry, yeah, I was muted.
No problem.
As I was saying, my day-to-day is a bit different, as Diego was mentioning. It really depends on what I'm assigned to. It can be from tree planting, which we can do about 8 to 10 trees per day. So depending on that day, we can do 8 to 10 trees. And then we can do from a big street, or we can do just an individual home in front of that individual home. So it really depends on that. If I'm not doing tree planting, I am also doing a structural maintenance for the trees. So we maintain the trees, we give them water, we make sure there's no trash around it, around the area. We make sure that it's pruned if possible. We prune them if they need to. We also give them a lot of water, especially when it's the hottest days. We make sure that they're well established, standing, that they're not missing anything, that they're not supposed to, like stakes and ties and such. So it just depends on the day what we get.
But you're outside a lot, yes?
Yes, never in the office.
All right. Leslie.
Yes, so what I do in my everyday role at the Corps is I am involved in assisting with the yard tree delivery program as mentioned. So I'm always providing customer service to Angelenos. I am accepting applications in the back end of the software where the applications go through. I also help for the events that partners host, as well as events that LACC hosts. So I get together the list and we set aside the trees needed for those events. And we go ahead and provide a lot of trees to residents in LA. And it's honestly very exciting for me because a lot of residents are very into the urban forestry. So when they know that their trees are going to be delivered, they get very excited. So knowing that we get to bring excitement to Angelenos brings excitement to me, knowing that we're providing stuff that they love.
Great. Thank you. Roberto?
So for me, basically following up on what Anna said, we usually work together a lot. So yeah, my day-to-day usually consists of prioritizing tree planting, tree establishment, just making sure that, the trees are healthy, for their well-being. But we also tend to help each other out in the way where we tend to reach our goals for the day and we help each other. So for instance, if we finish our tasks way before other people have, we tend to communicate with each other if they need help, and if they need help, we just go out and support them as well. And yeah, we also have little duties around here at the office. We could be from tree organizing to mulch replenishment, stake sorting, just multiple little tasks like that as well. Okay.
I'm a day-to-day.
There you are.
A day-to-day role for an East LA Corps member like myself would be basically it can range anywhere from breaking concrete and removing it to make spaces for the trees that we will plant. It will be planting the trees that we have at our facilities. We also we go around cleaning up the neighborhoods in the streets of LA. We take care of the trees, watering them daily. As was mentioned, as some of the other sides, we will restake them if they need to be restaked, retie them if they need to be retied, and clean around them if it's needed, and things of that nature.
Well, thank you. Next slide. How do you see the work that you're doing impacting or benefiting your communities? Star, why don't we start back with you? Work.
Well, like when I pass through places that we had previously planted and like I see the trees doing well, like it's just, I don't know, like it excites me. I see that like they be thriving. Again, like I said, the community get really involved when they see the trees. Like when they see us planting them, they be all super excited, asking questions and be wanting to help us sometimes. And like that's very exciting. Um, yeah, like I like the fact that it beautifies our neighborhoods and make it look different, you know, and make it that much more enjoyable to actually go outside and take walks. It provides shade for us in places that it really be needing at times. So yeah, that's how it benefits my community.
Great, thank you. Roberto?
So one of the things that I saw that impacted my community was when I first started working at Tree People in 2017. Most people saw that trees were non-beneficial to the community, as in like they would lift sidewalks, dump a lot of trash, which is the leaves. And basically a lot of people wouldn't accept them because they would think that it would cost a lot to kind of maintain if we were just watering in general. And once we started planting more and more trees, the community started seeing that, the trees actually bring beauty into the community and a lot of shade. And once they started asking questions and then like, oh, what would this tree, like what would it need just to maintain its proper health and everything? And then we would explain to them, we have workshops and just flyers and pamphlets that we could kind of round up just to let them know that it usually takes $5 or less just to water a tree yearly, and we'll show them all the benefits that these trees are semi-deciduous or they'll be like non-sidewalk lifting. And once they started kind of accepting the knowledge of those trees that they won't be harmful, they kind of started kind of like gathering as a community, and they'll start kind of like having like their own little meetups and be like, hey, if you see them, accept the tree from them because it's actually pretty beneficial for us. So the fact of us going in there, kind of having like a bad eye towards the people, and then actually changing their perspective and their point of view on how nature can benefit them. It was very, I guess you could say, heartwarming and very, I felt very accomplished. And I'm pretty sure my team did as well, that we were able to change people's minds in our communities about nature.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let me jump around a bit to the same question of how do you see the work that you're doing impacting and benefiting your community? Anna, what do you say?
I feel that it's important to have that that information also that the community gives to us. For example, I've had some areas where I done tree planting, and then people come up to me and ask me, hey, what can we do to have a tree in this area where there's no shade, where there's no tree, and people don't seem to like to walk a lot in that area because the fact that it's so lonely. So having that impact us as well and give us that information also gives us information to give to our managers for us to do something about having more trees planted on that area.
Thank you. Great. Diego, what do you say?
Yeah, so our nursery's main objective is to produce plants and trees sourced from local populations to support Northeast Trees' many greening projects, right? So despite that, it is distinct from every other native tree growing operation in the greater Los Angeles area in that it is the only nursery led by local youth for local youth. Before we had to suspend our volunteer programming due to the pandemic, nearly every stage of our operations was intimately dependent on and accessible to volunteer support. Students got to personally experience and witness every life stage of each plant produced at the nursery, from initial seed collection to the final outplanting of their seeds turned trees, like out during restoration days. In that sense, I feel that our nursery represents a necessary shift in the environmental movement, since it enables those that will inherit their communities and our planet to have greater agency over the course of their own community. Under the guidance by local youth who share the same life experiences and a similar desire to build a brighter and greener future, our volunteers leave our nursery with a more meaningful and intimate connection with our local natural world and a direct stake in mutual youth empowerment. Youth have the power to equitably green our city, and our nursery is just the catalyst for that movement.
Tell me a bit more about the nursery itself. Is it just for community residents? Is it, and can people purchase things there? What's it like?
Yeah, we get that question a lot. So no, our nursery isn't a retail nursery. So like I mentioned before, our nursery is all the plant material that we produce either gets directed towards Northeast Trees greening projects. We have many greening projects throughout the city and county.
Nice.
A portion of those plants also get directed towards community-led restoration efforts. So we do support a group of volunteers at Ascot Hills Park who lead their own restoration efforts. I'm also in the process of supporting other community-led restoration efforts throughout Northeast LA. But essentially, despite that, I do give a lot of plants back to the community. Like any volunteer or even park visitors who come by who express interest in native plants, I tend to give plants away because there really is a lack of access to that plant material. And I feel that the best way to engage community in our local biology is by providing them the opportunity to interact with those plants and watch them grow and feel empowered to see the difference that they make when they plant trees and plants in their own community.
Okay, thank you. I think we should go to the next slide and then we'll start with Leslie there. All right. What does diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice mean to you in urban greening? And why are those three actually four: diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice? Why are they important? Leslie?
Right, so I believe these are all important in urban greening because there are a lot of communities, as Diego mentioned, Lincoln Heights, for example, El Sereno also. There's a lot of communities where there's not a lot of urban greening. So a lot of that diversity in those areas are Hispanics, so they don't have a lot of knowledge with urban greening. So being able to reach out to those communities and inform them of what urban greening is and how it could benefit them, it's something that I believe needs a little bit more movement towards. So I believe that it's important for us to kind of spread that idea through all the communities. I know my grandma, she lives in Australia, so telling her about the trees and stuff, she gets excited because she actually has some herself for her property. So I know that the idea of it just needs to be more spread out to everybody.
Well, and before I move on, I could just say that listening to you, well, I know what a difference it makes to me when I'm in nature, when I'm around trees, when I go to the flower mart, where you have a chance to really be in nature and find the hiking, the breathing, all of those things that don't cost any money, but bring such great joy and benefit. Roberto, how do you feel about diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, and their importance to urban greening?
Well, one of the things that stood out to me was that when I first started getting involved with the urban greening field, was that I wouldn't see a lot of female representatives out in the field doing hard labor. Especially in my community, because in my community, a lot of people thought that planting trees was too hard of a job for a female. And little by little, as time was progressing, I started seeing more and more female representatives starting to be out there and planting, doing tree care. And then one of the things that also stood out to me was that when I was working at Tree before, I remember there was I think we were doing tree planting or tree care. I don't really remember, but there was this guy that kind of like approached us and was asking questions about the trees and how we would take care of them and stuff. And at that time, my manager was there, and she was a female, and the guy was kind of seeking towards us, thinking that one of us was in charge. But then when he asked who's in charge here, we just pointed, told him that's our manager right there. And he was a little surprised, and I was like, oh, it's kind of, in his eyes it wasn't right, because he's like, who would have thought that a female manager would be representing us, that we're out in the field and stuff like that, right? So that was a big eye opener for me, that in my community people thought that way. And now seeing it now, I think it's pretty important that that we change our mindsets about that, about the diversity, about female representatives being able to work hard labor jobs. And there's a lot of capable women out there that are probably even more capable than me, that to seek out this job. So I think that that's very important, that this this acknowledgement is finally being shown out there.
Thank you. Star?
To me, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. What's your experience?
To me, all of these things in urban greening, what it means to me is basically just like what we are doing, planting these trees in neighborhoods that don't really have them, that are less fortunate than other neighborhoods like Beverly Hills and like other places like, where a lot of people that are not like minorities live, like they got access to all of these trees and all of these things, and we don't. And the fact that we are doing this around our neighborhoods is important to me, because it's giving us that same opportunity. Like, we get to go outside now and like breathe fresh air and not just have to walk outside and it's nothing but concrete and street. And I learned that with more trees, the crime rate is actually lowered, and which is a good thing, being in the communities where it is a lot of crime and bad things happening. Like, trees bring a sense of peace and calmness, and us being able to put that into our neighborhoods and communities is very important.
Great. Thank you. Anna?
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
I like to think that we're the bridge that will connect us to the community. As a woman, for me it's hard to do my job, even though I love it. Sometimes it does get hard because you do have that male, come in sometimes here and there, ask why are you doing a man's job, or why are you doing this? You shouldn't be doing this. Just because I'm a woman, just because I'm something they haven't seen. But I like to think that just by me focusing on trying to plant more trees, trying to be more to impact the community more, they will see the work that we do. Not that I'm a woman, but just in general, that everyone is doing this job, this favor to the community by helping them out, giving them more green space, more shade, more beautify more their community as well.
Great. Thank you. And Diego?
Yeah, so this question is a big one, right? I think this is something that we've been trying to answer throughout the entirety of this panel. For me, trees are universal. Everyone wants and needs trees in their community. The reality of our city, however, is that there are many communities that have an incredible lack of urban canopy and even bear a disproportionate amount of systemic environmental injustice and racism. While our city has been doing a good job about bridging this tree gap in those communities, I pose this question in that what happens when this greening indirectly contributes to neighborhood displacement, right? I know for a fact that there are many people in my community who fear urban greening and consider it a threat to their right to remain in our community. I believe that equity and justice in urban forestry necessitates working with these neighborhoods and not against them. For urban forestry to work and realize a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable city, as Garcetti mentions, we have to realize greener communities in ways that our community members prefer. Inclusion transcends giving communities the right to self-determination. It also must require empowering communities to be a part of their neighborhoods greening and healing in the form of job opportunities, opportunities for education, et cetera, et cetera. Without this concerted work, any stride towards a greener city will work against our intentions to making nature and trees more accessible for our communities most vulnerable, to those that would have benefited most from trees in our streets.
Great. Thank you. Are there other questions? Is there another slide? Or do I get to ask some questions?
You've got 2 questions left. We've got, how do you think you'll carry your current work with you in your future career paths? And then also what advice, the next one is, what advice would you give to folks looking to get into urban forestry? But Deputy Mayor.
That was one question. Let's just make that one.
Yeah.
Has everyone heard it, or we can put them both up?
Let's see. I think they're on 2 different slides. I'll leave
But
it up to you.
everyone can hear, right?
Say that again?
Everyone can hear, or they can see the slide, right?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, so let's just make this one, because we're getting tight on time, and there were a couple of questions that I did want to squeeze in. So why don't we use this question? What advice would you give to someone looking to get into the urban forestry field? And the second one is, and how do you think you'll carry your current work with you in your future career paths? Does that work for everyone? Sort of, yes?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, why don't we do that, Anna? You got them both.
Yes. I think for the first question, it would be a lot of patience, because like I said before, this job is not easy. There are certain steps you have to make in order to plant a tree. It's not just, oh, dig up the hole and then throw in the tree. No, there's certain steps that you have to go through in order to plant the tree properly, and for the tree to have more survival rate than having a tree that you just throw in there and just leave it be. I think that me personally, I'm in the right job because I want to be sorry, somebody's speaking in the back of me. I want to be a arborist. So one of my goals is to continue with more information that I learn each day. And I'm sure that this is going to help me learn more species, help me be more effective with my job, and help my community, but also serve a great nonprofit as well. So that's why I think that will help me in my future goals.
Great, thank you. Leslie.
Yes, so an advice I would give somebody trying to join urban forestry is just do it. Once you're in it, you're gonna grow a lot of knowledge, and you're gonna really get into the topics of all of it. So I went into this job not really knowing about urban forestry. So the 6 months that I've been here, I've grown a lot of knowledge on it. So like I said, I would just go into it and just do it. You'll really enjoy this type of field.
All right. Roberto. Roberto, are you muted?
Yeah, can you hear me?
There we can, great.
The advice that I would give to someone looking to get into the urban forestry field would be that if you're really into urban forestry, you already have the knowledge that, because I wasn't really never into forestry at first, like I said, I just started by going with one of my best friends to a tree care event, and I actually decided to pay attention and be like, you know what, let me give this a try, see if I actually really like it, and I ended up falling in love with it. And I always ask myself the same question every year, like, who would have thought I would have been tree planting, 10 years from now, when I really didn't really, pay attention to nature that much. So my advice would be, if you really get into it and you really like it, dig into it, because you not only gain a lot of knowledge about trees, different plants, sometimes you even get knowledge of animals just because, you're surrounded by them so much. But for me, it was also like a life-changing experience, because I wasn't really, that into good paths before, and slowly shifting myself into nature, it changed my life. It changed me into a better person. It changed me to a better man. So I really strongly recommend you guys to be part of the urban forestry community if you really want to be part of it.
Great, thank you. There's Star.
Yeah, so right now I already feel like I carry it with me, because a lot of stuff that I learned when I go around, like, because I have relatives that have plants, or like neighbors, and when I see them with their trees or doing something with them, like I tell them tips that I learned here actually at the Corps, like how to maintain their plants and things of that nature. And I feel like if anybody that's interested in doing this, since I learned everything that I know with the trees from the Corps, I would basically just direct them to come here. Like, it's a good start, and it's a good place for them to get hands-on experience right off the bat. And KYCC too, because they basically do the same thing that we do. So I would just refer them to go to one of those sites, and like do their own research and like really look into it. And they could also like start at home. They could plant their own trees at home, because we also have programs that deliver to your homes if you are LA County resident. So like, just practice and just try it out, see if you like it, go to events and do things of that nature.
Thank you. And then there's Diego.
Yeah, so in regards to future career paths, this is a little personal, but I've actually recently applied for graduate school. I'm hoping to pursue a doctorate in plant science or ecology as an aspiring professor or educator within those fields. As such, all of my experiences working at Northeast Trees as a nursery manager in urban forestry have really prepared me in understanding how best to teach. I've come to learn that while there's so much value in teaching others new and novel things about trees and restoration work, there's also so much value in listening. Listening to youth, listening to community members, to abuelas and abuelos about their experiences living in environmentally unjust communities, about why they value nature, and about how they would like to interface and access open spaces in their communities. This has all really taught me that our people really have a lot to offer in regards to how we pursue urban forestry work. More often than not, it's community members who are the experts in creating equitable and greener communities that truly serve their needs. This is really the type of model that Northeast Trees has pioneered since our inception. So in that sense, I want to continue providing opportunities for nature-based engagement. I want to continue empowering young minds to defend what they value and believe in. And I want to continue using urban forestry as a tool for community self-determination and empowerment. And lastly, just in regards to advice, I would say that urban forestry is such a diverse field. There are so many opportunities to engage in greening your own community and so much need. If I had to give advice to my fellow youth, I would say that whatever your skills may be, there is a niche for you to fill in urban forestry. Urban forestry is not just about planting trees. It also requires policymakers to create meaningful legislation, scientists pursuing new means to maximize ecosystem services, community organizers working with community members to ensure urban greening is done in an equitable way that truly promotes community needs. We're talking about work like research, outreach, policy work, conservation work, et cetera, et cetera. I would say start with what you enjoy and seek out those opportunities. Finally, I will also encourage the next generation of urban foresters to not be afraid of challenging the paradigm set by your predecessors. There's so much more progress to be made, and we really need to establish a set of young minds from diverse backgrounds and lived experiences to even come close to reaching an equitable and greener city. To all my brown, Black, low income, and queer youth out there, I say your communities need you. Don't be afraid to step up, however that may be.
Great, thank you. And to the other 4 of you, have you decided that this is what you want to do? Is this your career path?
I would say for me, it is. Like I said, I'm just pursuing my goal as of right now. So this is something that will carry on to my future.
Great. Star?
As far as working with trees in particular, not really, but working with the community, yes, I do want to go into social work. That way I can still, you know, be with the community and help the community in other ways.
Great. Roberto.
Definitely 100%. I do tend to stick to urban green and urban forestry. There's no way that I see myself doing something else other than, you know, keep on planting trees and taking care of them. And I also tend to become a licensed arborist soon, so I'm gonna really work on that. And focus myself to just become greater, and then, you know, try to give ourselves a sustained, livable planet. You know, because I know we're not that great right now. So let's. I want to be a big part of that change, a big factor, and I hope everyone does too. You know, so I'm sticking to it 100%.
Leslie? Is it your
So for me, no, I am currently in college studying to be a registered nurse, but this was a great was a great opportunity for me, and I do still plan to apply urban forestry in my life by getting involved in the community, and there are a lot of opportunities in which you can volunteer. So I still do plan to volunteer once I do reach my career goal, which is becoming a registered nurse.
Thank you. Is there anything anyone wants to add?
Do you have time for questions?
Yeah, are there questions? Are there any questions? Rachel, anybody have questions?
Yeah, let me take a look in the chat. I know, Star, you had you identified a question in the chat that you wanted to answer about what you would do differently. We have from an anonymous attendee who asked, I want to know what these youth would do differently. We have terrible planting practices and large portion of our street trees die within the first few years. What have these kids learned that can teach the adult leaders who don't seem to care? Star, I know you particularly want to answer that one, so feel free to take it away.
I was actually kind of in the midst of answering, but to answer it, I was saying, basically like being a part of the youth and seeing the outcome of these trees, like I would actually probably have like maintenance go out a little more often than what we are doing to actually maintain them more and to make sure that they are being properly taken care of the way that they should be. Also, like we plant them, but we also are partnered with other people who actually do the maintenance or water them. And that's not just on us. So like the people that are higher up that are connected to them should probably reach out to them to make sure that they're actually on top of doing it, because since it's not us, then we're not actually, the ones who are making sure that it is properly taken care of. And just because we care the way that we do does not mean that they necessarily do. So I feel like they should reach out to them to make sure that they are actually on top of the job that they are actually supposed to be doing, to make sure that these trees are properly taken care of, so we wouldn't have to go back to take those trees out that we already planted to replant a fresher one.
Great.
Thanks so much, Star. I know it's something that we've been speaking to this entire time. It's going to be a collaborative effort, right, between city agencies, community leaders, members, and you all, of course. Diego, I know I've got a few questions in the chat about wanting to know the name of your nursery and location, if people can come and visit. So from Leslie Olmos, maybe you can write that in the chat if you see it in the Q&A. That would be really supportive. I think we're about over time. I wish we had more time for more questions, but wow, thank you so much. Dr. Brenda Shockley, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. And before I sign off, let's get clear. I'm a lawyer, so I get a JD, but I'm not really a doctor. I'm just Brenda. So I hope that anyone who wants to follow up, has questions or any, feel free to reach out to me. I'm in the city directory and would love to hear from you. This has been a really extraordinary experience for me. And one of those moments where I am absolutely certain that I learned more than I could possibly teach. But what I also learned and carry with me, and what reminds me, is just how equity, inclusion, diversity, it permeates every aspect of our lives. And for me, equity, inclusion, all of it turns on basic fairness. That it doesn't mean taking from others to give to others. It means expanding our capacity to be the city and the person and the communities that not only do we want, but that we deserve. And as the new administration talks about green jobs and how green jobs will be able in many ways to help rescue us in the recovery, we must always be mindful to make sure that those communities, it's so often sort of to the issue of quality of life is thrown in as though there's a choice. You either have it or you don't. But it is life. It's not quality of, it is life. Nature belongs to all of us. The benefits of the trees, all of that is lived out by the work that is being done here, being done by the department, and is the future listening to these young people who have made a commitment, even if this is not going to be what they continue to ultimately do, that they bring an appreciation and a sensitivity to their communities and to their surrounding areas that they will share with others. And so to each of you, I say thank you. I have certainly learned a lot. And thank you for demonstrating what it really means to be able to provide that, if you will, conscience for our planet and for our communities. So again, thank you, Rachel. Thank you to the department for inviting me, and to each of the panelists, thank you for sharing, and only the best for you going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Mayor, and thank you again to our panelists. What an honor to have you all up here. So wonderful listening to you. Just, we are over time, but thank you all so much for coming, and wanted to shout out quickly that tomorrow we are doing this entire webinar all over again in Spanish. At the same time, you'll get to hear from many of these same youth panelists tomorrow in Spanish. So for those of you who know Spanish speakers who would love to access this information, please do feel free to share this. We'll be posting on the City Plan's Instagram. We sent out a newsletter, and we'll be sharing on our website and our calendar as well, so you can RSVP for the Spanish session tomorrow there. But what an honor to have everyone here today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you to all of our panelists, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.